unfold.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are going deep into a story that really sits at this uncomfortable, fascinating intersection of just catastrophic failure and almost impossible triumph.
We're talking about Sir Ernest Shackleton's Imperial Transantarctic Expedition, the one that ran from 1914 to 1917.
And it really is the ultimate paradox of exploration, isn't it?
It is. I mean, think about it. The journey achieved, well, none of its geographical goals, no science to speak of, and yet it's universally hailed as the most successful failure in history.
Because it stopped being about planting a flag.
It became a pure, brutal saga of survival, and in the end, one of the greatest feats of crisis leadership ever recorded.
And that's our mission today. We're going to try and move past the heroic adventure story and really dissect the operational mechanics, the psychological framework.
The raw, granular decision.
Exactly. The decisions that let Shackleton bring all 28 men of his party home alive from the absolute jaws of the Antarctic.
Yeah.
So for you, the listener, this is kind of the blueprint for leadership when everything is already lost.
To really get the depth of that survival, you have to understand the sheer height of the ambition that launched it in the first place. By 1914, the golden age of polar exploration was pretty much over.
Right. The poles had been claimed. Amundsen got to the South Pole in 1911.
And Scott's tragic journey followed right after, so the big prizes were gone.
But Shackleton had his own demons to lay to rest, didn't he? He'd turned back just 97 miles from the pole on a previous expedition.
In 1909, yes. So our sources call this new journey his bid for the last great prize, a full, physical, sea-to-sea crossing of the entire South Polar continent.
Redemption on a continental scale.
And a bid like that, it requires people. And this is where we get that famous, almost mythic recruitment ad.
Ah, yes, the legendary text. Men wanted for hazardous journey. Small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return, doubtful. Honor and recognition in case of success.
That phrase is probably more famous than the expedition itself.
It is, and I find this fascinating that archival research suggests the exact text is, well, it's probably apocryphal.
It might not have been published in exactly that way, no. But the spirit of it, that speaks to a profound truth about Shackleton's priorities. He wasn't just hiring sailors.
He was prioritizing character, resilience, temperament, over just raw technical skill.
Which is such a critical choice. I mean, he got over 5,000 applications.
For a crew of 27? That's insane.
And when he interviewed Reginald James, the physicist, he didn't ask about thermodynamics.
He asked if he could sing.
And that tells you everything. He knew the real threat wasn't the ice or the cold. It was internal collapse. It was morale.
The skills you need to manage a psychological breakdown are completely different from the skills you need to navigate.
Absolutely. He knew these men would be locked in the dark together, maybe for years. Morale was the expedition's single most critical resource.
And their transport for this journey was the Endurance, a name that, well, it proved to be tragically ironic.
Oh, she was a magnificent vessel. A 300-ton, barkentine-rigged steamship built in Norway specifically for ice work.
So she had sails and an engine.
Exactly. A mix of square sails for speed and fore and aft sails for maneuverability. Her hull was just massive. We're talking layers of oak and fir, almost 30 inches thick at the bow, and sheathed in this wood called greenheart, which is so hard it's practically iron. It was built to be a fortress.
But it had that one single fatal design flaw, especially when you compare it to a ship like Nansen's Fram.
That is the critical technical detail right there. The Fram had to proceed, and that was the command that sent them completely oblivious into the growing darkness of the South.
So with that historical mandate,
Yeah.
they left South Georgia, the last outpost of anything that you could call civilization, December 5, 1914.
And almost immediately, Shackleton got warnings from the people who knew that ice better than anyone.
A local Norwegian whalers.
Yes, these weren't theorists. These were the old stagers, men who had spent their entire lives fishing the edges of the Antarctic. And they delivered a unanimous and, frankly, dire warning.
What did they tell him?
They told him the ice conditions in the Weddell Sea were the worst they'd seen in living memory. They advised him, begged him really to delay, maybe wait an entire season.
But he didn't.
No. Shackleton was driven by momentum, by the huge financial investment, and that personal need for redemption. He chose to push south immediately.
I have to ask, though, In ignoring the advice of genuine local experts, was he guilty of a kind of hubris? The same kind that doomed earlier expeditions, like Scott's.
That's a crucial challenge to his leadership narrative, and it's complicated. It was definitely a strategic mistake, but it was one fueled by just tremendous pressure.
The clock was ticking.
The clock was ticking, the war was starting, his resources might be drawn away, he felt he had to go. And that decision, pushing into that known danger, put them squarely in the path of the Weddell Sea Gyre.
Explain that gyre. It sounds ominous.
It's a geographical death sentence. It's this massive clockwise current that traps ice and just pushes it relentlessly against the eastern flank of the Antarctic Peninsula. It acts like a giant, slow-moving vice.
So for weeks, the Endurance is fighting this white armor.
Ramming the floes, reversing, cutting through the dense pack ice. They were making incredible progress considering they got within 1,000 miles, nearing Vosel Bay, their landing spot.
So close.
So close you could practically smell the continent. But the environment always holds the ultimate card. On January 18, 1915, a northeasterly gale just slammed all that loose pack ice against the landmass.
And the open water just vanished.
It vanished completely. The temperature dropped just enough to cement it all together into a solid sheet. The Endurance was trapped, frozen fast, beset.
And the physical trap immediately becomes a psychological one.
They've stopped moving toward their goal, and for the next 10 months, the ice carries the ship slowly, inexorably north, away from the continent.
And then came the long polar night.
May to August. The sun just disappears. Imagine the psychological weight of that. The historian Alfred Lansing wrote it was like a return to the Ice Age. Prolonged darkness like that has literally driven men mad.
So if the external world is just chaos and darkness, how does a leader maintain cohesion? How do you stop the internal collapse?
This is where you see Shackleton's genius for morale. He had to turn that stranded ship into a distraction machine, a floating village.
He mandated strict routines.
Structure is the enemy of despair. He organized the Antarctic Derby, staging these elaborate dog sled races across the ice with betting and everything. It injected novelty, purpose.
They put on plays, played soccer on the ice.
Anything to keep their minds occupied. But these weren't just distractions. They were mandatory socialization exercises.
He deliberately broke down the ship's hierarchy.
Precisely. Officers, forecastle hands, scientists, sailors, all forced into close, equal interaction. It prevented resentful cliques from forming. But he also managed specific individuals.
This is his proximity control strategy. This is where he becomes a political chess player.
He had a keen eye for independent spirits who might challenge authority when the pressure really mounted.
Like the carpenter, Harry McNeish.
McNeish, who was surly but brilliant, and the opinionated photographer, Frank Hurley, he flagged them both.
And his solution wasn't to punish them or isolate them.
No, it was the opposite. He neutralized the dissent by keeping them close. He'd assign these potential troublemakers to his own tent or his own mess circle.
He kept them under constant observation.
It's a draining tactic for a leader, I'm sure, but it was essential for managing that fragile group psychology.
And while he's managing all this, the external world is just getting more and more hostile. I want to go back to the sensory reality of this. It wasn't just cold.
It wasn't silent. That's the key thing. The ice field wasn't static. It was a vast, restless, tectonic mass. Pressure ridges. Actual mountains of ice could just erupt out of nowhere. The ship was surrounded by this cacophony of groans, shrieks, and roars.
It sounds like being trapped inside a building that's perpetually collapsing.
That's a perfect description. The floes grinding together, the high-pitched shriek of ice shearing, the deep, terrifying groan of the pressure building 24 hours a day, a constant reminder that their sanctuary was temporary.
And a terrifying acoustic backdrop. It just builds and builds to this destructive climax in October of 1915.
The pressure after 10 months became overwhelming, and the death of the Endurance. It was a moment of true, visceral violence.
The accounts are just brutal. This was not a quiet sinking.
No, it was a noisy execution. They described the massive oak and fir beams, the spine of the ship snapping with a sound like pistol shots.
They heard it scream like a living thing.
Frank Wild, ever the pragmatist, he recorded the sound of the ship's ribs cracking under the demon's yell of the ice. The ship fought, but the forces were just too enormous.
So on October 27, 1915, Shackleton realized the fight was over.
He gave the order. Abandon ship.
And the crew just scrambles to salvage what they can. The 3 lifeboats, some gear, sledges. And the 49 dogs.
They watched their home, their floating fortress, just get squeezed and splintered and finally swallowed by the ice. And that moment, that should have been the moment of total psychological breakdown.
But this is the moment that defines the whole crisis leadership case study, the famous psychological pivot.
He did it through immediate, decisive redefinition. A lesser leader would have been paralyzed. Shackleton gathered the men right there on the unstable ice, cutting off any moment for collective mourning. He just stated calmly, "So now we'll go home."
He didn't even mention the failed crossing. The mission instantly shifted from explorer to survivor.
Absolutely. He gave them a new, clear, manageable objective: rescue. He replaced the lost physical anchor, the ship, with the new moral anchor: get every single man back alive.
So they're castaways on a drifting piece of ice. They set up Ocean Camp, and later, the grimly named Patience Camp.
And their existence becomes instantly Paleolithic. They're in these thin linen tents that offered basically no protection. You could see the stars through the fabric.
And their clothes were just constantly damp.
Constantly damp, rubbing against frozen skin. It was just a basic battle of calories in versus energy out.
Which brings us to the whoosh and the horrifying blubber economy.
Hoosh was their staple, this thick, fatty stew of seal and penguin meat, often cooked with blood and blubber to get every possible calorie. But the fuel source, seal blubber, that was the fire.
What did that mean for the sensory environment? The smell?
Oh, it was repulsive. The smoke from the blubber stoves was thick, greasy, black. It coated everything: their clothes, their faces, the inside of their lungs. The constant smell was just this backdrop of burning fat, unwashed men, and fear.
The cold and the damp were constant. But the source materials say the real gnawing companion was hunger.
Yes, and their psychological coping mechanism was just elaborate food fantasizing. They would spend hours detailing meals.
Munich beer, Coromandel, rock oysters, apple pie.
Steaming apple pie with Devonshire cream. They were constructing these multi-course banquets in their minds. It was a powerful, if temporary, escape from their state of barbarism.
But the hunger eventually forced these brutal ethical choices. The diet of desperation.
As the drift went on, hunting became more sporadic. Rations were cut again and again, and Shackleton was forced to make the most brutal emotional cuts.
We talked about the animals.
The animals that had become their friends, their mascots. The first victims right after the ship sank were the puppies and the ship's cat, Mrs. Chippy.
A swift, pragmatic decision.
Just remove unnecessary mouths. But later, the working sled dogs, the ones who were essential for morale and hauling, they also had to be shot. They were consuming calories the men desperately needed.
And the final indignity.
The men were forced to eat the dog meat to sustain themselves. That is the brutal calculus of survival. Shackleton knew sentimental attachments had to be severed to preserve the group. Survival was the only morality left.
And all this strain, the misery, the moral compromises, it led directly to the only real challenge to Shackleton's command.
The McNeish Mutiny, a classic case study. Carpenter Harry McNeish, the very man Shackleton had been trying to manage with his proximity strategy, he chose his moment. It was December 27, 1915.
The men were doing that back-breaking work of hauling the lifeboats across the ice.
Exactly, and McNeish, the sea lawyer, just refused to go any further.
What was his argument? His legal argument.
And it was technically correct under standard maritime law. He said that because the Endurance was gone, the ship's articles, the contracts binding the crew, were terminated. He was a free agent.
If he had succeeded, the whole command structure would have crumbled.
And they all would have died. Shackleton had to respond instantly and ruthlessly.
And his response was a masterpiece of authority.
He produced the actual ship's articles and pointed to a specific clause they had all forgotten. A clause binding the crew to perform any duty on shore as directed by the master. He used that last vestige of civilization, that piece of paper, as an absolute weapon.
And he threatened force.
He made it clear that in this context, his command was absolute. McNeish capitulated, but Shackleton never forgave him. He later denied McNeish the Polar Medal.
Which shows that for him, loyalty wasn't a preference. It was the non-negotiable foundation of survival.
Absolutely. By April 1916, they'd been drifting for over a year, and their ice floe sanctuary began to disintegrate under the ocean swell.
The moment of truth arrived.
Yeah?
They had to launch their 3 salvaged lifeboats, the James Caird, the Dudley Docker, and the Stancomb Wills, into the Southern Ocean.
For 7 agonizing days, all 28 men were crammed into these tiny, open boats, battling freezing spray that coated them in ice armor, killer whales, and the absolute torture of thirst from contaminated water. It was just physical hell.
And then a sighting. land. Elephant Island, April 15th, 1916. Their first solid ground in 497 days.
The relief was momentary. Elephant Island was a desolate, blizzard-swept rock, uninhabited and, crucially, far from any shipping lanes. They were stationary, but they were still trapped. Shackleton knew instantly that staying there meant slow starvation.
So the decision was immediate. Rescue wasn't coming to them. They had to go to rescue.
And the only target was South Georgia, 800 miles across the Drake Passage, the most violent stretch of ocean on the planet.
Attempting that in a 22-foot open boat was...
Yeah.
It was a suicide mission.
It was the ultimate long shot, but it was the only shot. And this is where the redemption of the mutineer, Harry McNeish, really begins.
Despite the tension, McNeish's skill was the one thing that made the journey possible.
He essentially turned that open boat into a semi-seaworthy craft. He used salvaged wood from sledge runners and packing cases to raise the sides, the gunnels, to give them more height against the waves. He built a makeshift deck out of frozen canvas.
And the detail that always sticks with me.
Hmm?
How he sealed that deck.
To make it watertight, he sealed the seams with a mixture of seal blood and oil paint.
That grotesque composite was the only thing between them and the freezing South Atlantic.
For 16 days, it encapsulates the whole extremity of their situation.
And the crew selection for this tiny boat was also a masterclass in strategy.
It wasn't just about physical strength. He took 5 men with him. First, Frank Worsley, the brilliant navigator, the most critical single point of failure.
Of course.
Second, Tom Crean, a man of legendary strength and loyalty, the muscle. Third, McNeish himself.
So he took the potential troublemaker with him.
Exactly. He needed McNeish's skill, but he also needed to remove his dissent from the main group on the island to protect Frank Wilde's authority. Genius.
Who else?
He also took John Vincent, a strong bosun he thought might be a bully if left idle. And finally, Timothy McCarthy, a skilled seaman known for his unflagging optimism. It was a perfectly calculated team.
They launched on April 24th, 1916. 16 days in what Worsley called the white darkness, battling hurricane-force winds. The navigation alone is it's considered the greatest feat in maritime history.
And that's not hyperbole. Worsley called it a merry jest of guesswork. Imagine trying to use a sextant, a precise instrument for a stable deck and a clear horizon, in a tiny boat being thrown around by 60-foot waves.
How on earth did he manage it?
He had to be physically held steady by 2 other men. He'd wait for that split second when the boat crested a wave, giving him a fleeting glimpse of the sun or a star, and he'd snap a sighting. He only managed 4 clear sightings in the entire 16 days.
The rest was dead reckoning.
Which is basically just estimating your position based on speed and direction. In that chaos, the potential for error is immense. If he'd been off by a single degree, they would have missed South Georgia entirely and just vanished into the Atlantic.
And the voyage peaked with that moment of pure sensory horror. The rogue wave.
It was midnight, May 5th. Shackleton was at the tiller. He sees this line of white foam approaching, and for a second he thinks the sky is clearing. Then the horror dawns on him. It's the crest of a gigantic wave.
He wrote he'd never seen anything like it in 26 years at sea.
He just screamed, "For God's sakes, hold on, it's got us!"
The wave completely buried them. They were submerged, drowning. Miraculously, the little boat resurfaced half full of water. They spent hours just bailing for their lives.
And the physical toll of being constantly soaked in freezing salt water.
It was horrific. They suffered from these painful, pus-filled saltwater boils from the constant friction of wet, salt-caked clothes on their skin. Their legs were raw.
Compounded by the torture of thirst.
The contaminated water meant their tongues were so swollen from dehydration they could barely swallow. They were suffering organ failure while navigating a hurricane. On May 8th, they finally sighted South Georgia.
But the ocean wasn't finished with them.
A sudden hurricane blew up. They couldn't land for 2 agonizing nights. They could see salvation but couldn't reach it. Finally, on May 10th, Shackleton surfed the Caird through a narrow gap in the reef at 𝐏𝐿𝐃 Bay. They had done the impossible.
But they were safe from the sea, not from the land. They had landed on the wrong side of the island, the uninhabited western coast. And they were completely separated from the whaling stations on the eastern side by a range of unmapped, jagged glaciers and peaks. Their ordeal was not over.
The James Caird was too damaged to sail around, so the only option was to attempt the first-ever crossing of South Georgia's interior.
Shackleton chose Worsley and Crean to go with him. McNeish, Vincent, and McCarthy were left behind, too weak to travel, under the overturned boat.
And their alpine gear was pathetic. A joke.
They had a length of rope and a carpenter's adze as a makeshift ice axe. Their clothes were just frozen rags.
But this is where 𝐏𝐻𝐃, the mutineer, performs his final act of ingenuity.
He took brass screws from the hull of the James Caird and hammered them into the soles of their rotting leather boots.
He made them makeshift crampons.
Those screws provided the critical traction they needed to cross the ice. Without them, they would have slipped to their deaths, no question.
They set out on May 19th, 36 hours of marching without sleep, navigating by moonlight, which led to this incredible moment, the leap of faith.
They were caught on a razor-edged ridge in deep fog at night. They were freezing to death. The slope below them just vanished into the mist. So Shackleton made this desperate, non-rational decision.
Just lied.
They sat on coils of rope, linked arms, and just launched themselves into the void, sliding thousands of feet, trusting it wouldn't end in a cliff or a crevasse. It was a literal gamble with their lives.
And they survived. They just stood up, shook hands, but it was during this agonizing trek that all three men experienced something inexplicable.
The fourth man phenomenon. This is the mystical part of the story. All three men, hardened, pragmatic explorers, later confessed to feeling an intangible presence with them.
Shackleton himself wrote, "It often seemed they were four, not three."
And Worsley and Crane independently confirmed the feeling. We don't know what it was. Extreme exhaustion. A shared psychological event.
But it suggests that when you're pushed beyond all rational hope, something else kicks in. A sense of guidance, of community.
And then the return to the world of men was signaled at 7 a.m. on May 20th.
The steam whistle.
The steam whistle of the Stromness whaling station, calling men to work, the first sound of machinery they'd heard in 18 months.
And when they stumbled into that station, they were terrifying. Filthy, black from blubber smoke, hair matted, reeking of death.
Thorolf Searle, the station manager, who knew Shackleton well, didn't even recognize them. He asked the famous question, "Who the hell are you?"
And Shackleton's reply, just so understated and monumental, "My name is Shackleton."
The manager reportedly turned away and wept. They had done what every single whaling captain on that island had deemed impossible.
And while all this was happening, 22 men were left behind on Elephant Island under the command of Frank Wild. Theirs was a different battle, a battle of patience.
For 4 months, Wild's leadership was the architecture of endurance. Their first goal was shelter. They overturned the 2 remaining lifeboats on low rock walls to create a dark, damp hut they called the Snuggery.
And the conditions inside were just bleak.
The floor was frozen guano and rock. The only heat and light came from the blubber stove, which filled the space with thick, black, oily smoke that stung their eyes.
Their diet was monotonous. Penguin steaks, boiled limpets.
And when the penguins migrated for the winter, the threat of starvation became acute. The strain was immense.
And medical conditions got worse.
The engineer, Rickinson, had a heart attack. Perce Blackborough, the young stowaway, developed gangrene in his toes from frostbite. The doctors had to perform amputations by candlelight.
Using the last of their chloroform.
And burning penguin skins to keep the patient from freezing during the surgery. It was field medicine at its most primitive.
So in this environment of just relentless misery, Wild's job was to prevent despair.
And his command was a masterclass in psychological structure, rigid routine. He organized sing-songs, he maintained strict control over the food, and he enforced a daily ritual that was purely about hope.
The famous order, lash up and stow.
Every single morning, Wild ordered the men to roll up their sleeping bags and pack them away. And then he would announce, "Get your things ready, boys. The boss may be here today."
He maintained that promise for 4 grueling months.
It was disciplined optimism used as a tool for survival.
Meanwhile, Shackleton is facing this heartbreaking series of failures, trying to get back to them.
He had made it to civilization, but the Antarctic refused to let go. The first attempt, the whaler Southern Sky, was stopped by 70 miles of pack ice.
Then the second attempt.
A Uruguayan government trawler, the Instituto de Pesca No. 1. It nearly foundered, wrecked by ice and heavy seas.
2 failures, 2 crushing blows.
The third attempt was a chartered schooner, the Emma, forced back by storms and engine failure. With each failure, the probability that the men on Elephant Island were dead grew higher.
So the fourth attempt was with this diminutive, completely unsuitable Chilean naval tug, the 𝐏𝐿𝐶.
On August 30th, 1916, they pushed one last time. And as they approached the island, miraculously, the ice opened just enough. Shackleton spotted the camp through his binoculars. He started counting the running figures.
And they were all there.
"They are all there," he cried. The 𝐏𝐻𝐃 edged toward the shore, and Shackleton shouted the question that summarized 2 years of hell, "Are you all well?"
And Frank Wild shouted back the immortal response, proving his leadership had held. "We are all well, boss."
They loaded all 22 men onto the tug in under an hour, terrified the ice would close again, and Shackleton's message to the world was a minimalist masterpiece. All safe, all well. He'd lost the continent, but he had saved his family.
So when we step back from the narrative, the facts are clear. The expedition failed. No geographic goal met, no science achieved. Yet it's one of history's greatest triumphs. Why?
Because of the context. It's 1916, Europe is consumed by the industrial slaughter of World War I. The public desperately needed a story where human life was infinitely valuable.
He provided a moral victory.
He showed that in a crisis, a leader's primary duty shifts. It's no longer about the objective, it's about preserving the people.
So let's boil it all down, the strategic framework. The key takeaways for any leader facing a catastrophic failure.
Okay, first you have the pivot. The immediate radical acceptance of the new, terrible reality. The minute the Endurance sank, the mission became survival. No regrets, just forward motion.
Second, radical empathy. Understanding the limits of your people. Shackleton giving his mittens to Hurley, ordering extra rations for weaker men while hiding his own hunger.
He led by emotional example. Third, proximity control. Managing dissent by keeping your enemies close. Keeping McNeish in his tent, monitoring morale, and neutralizing threats before they could spread.
Fourth, optimism as a tool. Not just being cheerful, but the disciplined projection of confidence. Frank Wild's daily lash up and stow ritual was institutionalized hope.
Exactly. And finally, number 5, structured routine. Using routine to impose order on chaos. The meal times, the social events, the watch schedules. They were managing their minds before they managed their rations.
It's the ultimate lesson. And that epitaph from Raymond Priestley, who served under both Scott and Amundsen, it just drives the point home.
He wrote, "For scientific leadership, give me Scott. For swift and efficient travel, Amundsen. But when you are in a hopeless situation, when there seems no way out, get down on your knees and pray for Shackleton."
The leader for when things are hopeless. That's the measure of the man. The story is built on these sensory realities. The sound of crushing timber, the smell of burning blubber, the grit of those brass screws in their boots. He failed across the continent, but he achieved a victory far greater.
He proved that when the mission fails, the people become the mission.
So we'll leave you with this final provocative thought. The story of the Endurance is inseparable from that shared, mystical experience of the fourth man. So what happens to the human spirit, that sense of resilience, of guidance, of community, when all rational, pragmatic hope has been extinguished? Does true leadership require tapping into something beyond the practical, something almost spiritual? That's the question the white darkness demands we ask ourselves.